Um, okay, this is where we're recording. Okay. Hello everyone and welcome to a thorough, in-depth analysis of Thomas Jefferson Miku Binder. I am your host. My name is Mel, otherwise commonly known on the internet as Beef Bronson, and I will be taking you through the lore and the history of the infamous Thomas Jefferson Miku Binder image. We'll start with a foreword on the history of Miku Binder, and then we will move on to the images themselves, the set of four, and then we will discuss the implications therein. So first of all, let's talk about Thomas Jefferson, the man himself. Who was Thomas Jefferson? He was the third president of the United States. He actually owned slaves. So that wasn't very cool of him to do that. But it is unfortunately a fact of life, that Thomas Jefferson did in fact own slaves. And maybe it was this fact that inspired Lin-Manuel Miranda to make his musical Hamilton. For those of you who are unaware, Lin-Manuel Miranda made Hamilton, which is a musical, and the musical is about Alexander Hamilton, who is a politician, or he was, because he is now dead. He was a politician who lived in the olden times, before cars and before iPhones. And so Lin-Manuel Miranda decided to take Alexander Hamilton and bring him into the modern day with rap music in a musical. And in this musical, he included other historical figures that Alexander Hamilton might have known in his time. This includes Aaron Burr, who was the vice president under Thomas Jefferson, and also who killed Hamilton in a duel. So that wasn't very poggers of him to do that. There's also James Madison, who is a person who existed. I do believe he was the president. This is a hotly contested fact. This is all sort of conjecture. I am not an expert in history, but I do believe that James Madison was the president of the United States at one point. John Adams he was the president, but he's never shown on screen. George Washington is shown in the musical, but this is, again, it's conjecture. We don't know what happened in these times, only that Lin-Manuel Miranda basically guesses that they rapped and spoke in rhymes about their problems, set to music. So if you sort of take that into consideration, Hamilton is very historically accurate. And that's something that comes across in the musical as well. But so Thomas Jefferson in Hamilton, in the musical Hamilton, is portrayed by Daveed Diggs. And now Daveed Diggs is a black man. Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and many of the characters are the historical figures they're based on were white. So Lin-Manuel Miranda actually casted, sort of in a sort of subversion, he casted a non-white actors to play his characters, which again is incredibly ironic, because many of these characters did own slaves. Interestingly, this is never mentioned in the musical except for Thomas Jefferson. It is mentioned that he did in fact own slaves, and this is a plot point that comes up a couple of times. So going into Hamilton's fandom and sort of the implications therein, it is clear sort of early on that people really attach themselves to these characters, and specifically to the character versions of the historical figures, in particular Thomas Jefferson of Miku Binder fame. We're going to get to the Miku Binder part, not quite yet, but Thomas Jefferson, the Daveed Diggs persona, as opposed to real life Thomas Jefferson from the old times before car radios and canned bread, back in ye olden days. I believe that there was the 1400s that Thomas Jefferson was alive. And so you have this new version of Thomas Jefferson who is sort of one step removed from the Stone Age Thomas Jefferson. And then Miku Binder Thomas Jefferson is actually one step removed from Hamilton Thomas Jefferson, because this is the point where people started making fan art of the characters from Hamilton and actually making alternate universes of Hamilton the musical, which is an alternate take of the history of real life. And so this is when you get Miku Binder Thomas Jefferson. Now, who is Miku? Miku is Hatsune Miku. She is a Vocaloid, a robot who does singing. She's not, contrary to popular belief, she's not a real person. This is something that was a shock to me in my research. Hatsune Miku is not a real person. But it is definitely noteworthy to mention that she is a character that is popular with the same demographics that Hamilton was popular with. And so that's how you sort of get the crossover between people who like Hamilton and people who like Hatsune Miku. And then this is, of course, how you get Miku Binder. It's also important to note that Hamilton, especially in the Tumblr Dark Ages, was very popular with young queer people. And now when you're young and you're queer, a couple of things happen. The first thing that happens is that you want representation of yourself in media, because especially when you're younger and you haven't seen many things yet, you might not be as understanding or as knowledgeable about queer representation, and so you want to see yourself in media. What happens then is that you get these alternate universes of things that already exist, with they're sort of like queerified. So you have queer characters that are made out of ostensibly straight characters. It's just so that these younger queer kids can sort of feel validated in the things that they like, by sort of headcanoning them as gay, or as trans, or whatever. The other thing that is important to note is that when you are younger, you have dumb baby bitch brain. And what happens with that is that you're actually stupid. Like, you're actually very, very stupid. And with that, you do dumb, stupid, baby bitch brain things. And this definitely leads us to the Miku Binder image itself, which we will now go in depth into all of the Miku Binder images. We will be dissecting every element of them. So let's start with the titular Miku Binder image. So this is Thomas Jefferson. This is the headcanoned version of the musical version of the real man. So in the bottom right corner, you can see the watermark of the artist. It sort of looks like a Zelda, like a Triforce thing. This does come up. Actually, it doesn't come up in any of the other images. So that's cool. So let's look at the design of Miku Binder Jefferson himself. So we have the first thing that I think is very noticeable is the shirt. The shirt says, "I met God, she's black." This is a subversion of Christian theology and stereotypes, whereas an evangelical Christian old white person might believe God to be a white man. This shirt actually subverts your expectations by actually claiming that God is a black woman. So that's interesting. That's pretty cool. And so if we look at the hair, it's very poofy. It's very poofy, and it's purpley, almost like a galaxy star pattern effect. There's no stars, but like it's sort of spacey. That's a very sort of evocative thing right off the bat. We have the bandana. It is a purple bandana. It's a lighter shade of purple than the hair, but it's a very nice shade of purple. The eyes, I can't really tell what color they are, but one does appear to be a darker shade than the other. So maybe this Miku Binder Thomas Jefferson has heterochromia, which is interesting. If you look at sort of his eyebrows, there's like a little triangle taken out of his left eyebrow. His left, our right eyebrow is sort of like an eyebrow slit. That's definitely something that's more fashionable nowadays. I'm not as knowledgeable about whether it would have been fashionable in the time that this image was made. Again, I'm a historian, so I'm analyzing this from a historical lens. And I'm just not quite sure if maybe Thomas Jefferson Miku Binder was a trendsetter, if he really sort of set the trend for eyebrow slits. So that's interesting. That's something I'll have to look into in my research. You sort of notice he has a beard, and it sort of comes up to the side of his face, like sideburns, kind of, and then he has a mustache. This is very interesting. As we go down, you can sort of go to his collar, and you see of course the titular, the Miku Binder. Now a binder is something that trans men or trans mask people wear to compress their chests to alleviate dysphoria from their breasts. And this is definitely something you can see. His chest is very flat. Thanks in no small part, I assume, to the Miku binder itself. And dotting this binder that Thomas is wearing, we see 3 heads of what we can only assume to be Hatsune Miku, in a design that was, to my knowledge, rendered by the artist themselves, and not an official drawing. And you can sort of see it to the left. It says binder design, with the Miku head pointing to Thomas Jefferson. And so that's just sort of indicating that is the design that is on the binder. And we get a closer look at it. It's a very cute design. Noticing, actually just now, I didn't even consider this. There are these 3 sort of yellow lines on the larger Miku head that aren't on the smaller ones. This could be a reference to Miku's shocked expression. But it's interesting that that's not present on the binder itself. Again, I'll have to do research on that. So now going into sort of this text that's on our left. This structure here, we sort of on top have like the name and general information of these interpretations of the characters. And then we sort of have a bullet point list that describes what the characteristics or personality quirks of these characters are. So let's get started. So of course up at the top we have his name, Thomas Jefferson. And then we have a male symbol, male as in the gender, not the package. Male, so it's a little circle with an arrow, indicating that he is in fact a man. And then to the right of that we have Thomas Jefferson's pronouns, which are he, him. Underneath that we have this English and French and some Japanese. These are the languages that Thomas Jefferson speaks. Now in real life, Thomas Jefferson did speak in English and in French. I'm not quite sure that he did speak Japanese in real life or in the musical. I don't think he even knew that Japan was a place that existed. So that's certainly some creative liberties taken on the part of the artist. It's one of the major creative liberties taken in this work, actually, that he speaks Japanese. So now, if we go to the right, we see these 2 sort of rectangles with colors on them. So the first one there is it is actually the transgender pride flag. It's defined by these light blue stripes on the outside, and then you go in, there's a light pink 2 stripes, and then in the very center there's a white stripe. That flag is meant to indicate that Thomas Jefferson is in fact transgender. And the binder also was sort of a clue to this. The binder was a clue to the fact that Thomas Jefferson is actually transgender. And then we have the flag to the right of that flag, which is this sort of pink and purple and blue affair. That is actually the bisexual pride flag. And so this flag it indicates that Thomas Jefferson is actually a bisexual, which is is sort of a way to say that he is sexually attracted to women as well as men. So and then we have some other information about him. So it says art education major. This is a reference to the fact that Thomas Jefferson goes to college. And he goes to college and he's studying art education as his major. Which is an interesting, again, creative liberty. Again, one of the major creative liberties taken in this work, that he's an art education major. Because I, to my knowledge, I'm not sure that the real Thomas Jefferson from the 1100s in the Dark Ages actually was interested in art education. So again, that's something I'll have to research. But then we have 5'11", which is a reference to Thomas Jefferson's height. He is 5 feet and 11 inches tall, which is actually a 1 inch under 6 feet. So that's interesting. Next to that, we have this sort of 26, and then it says Y/O. That means years old, and so this means that Thomas Jefferson is 26 years of age. Now, I don't know if Thomas Jefferson was ever 26 years old. Again, that's something I'll have to research. I'm just a historian. I wasn't there. I think that he might have been 26 years old, but I'll have to research. But again, that might be another one of the creative liberties that's in this art. And then under that, we have this sort of @ symbol, and it says, "Nobody tells me anything." Now, I did a little bit of research into this to sort of determine what exactly it meant, and I do believe that this is in reference to Thomas Jefferson's Twitter account. Now, when Thomas Jefferson was alive, they did actually have Twitter. So this is actually very historically accurate, that Thomas Jefferson had a Twitter account. I don't know, again, it's just me, I'm a historian, I wasn't there, right, but I don't know for a fact if Thomas Jefferson, his Twitter account was this particular @ Nobody tells me anything, but some research did show me that that Twitter account does exist, but I don't believe that it has any connection to Thomas Jefferson himself. So that's sort of an interesting thing that the artist did. So now we go into the actual bullet points on this sort of biography of Thomas Jefferson. Again, this reinterpretation of Thomas Jefferson from the musical Hamilton, who himself is a reinterpretation of Thomas Jefferson in real life. So the first thing we have is that he is born, like most humans are born and raised in Virginia. Now, Virginia is actually a state in the United States of America. So this might be a reference to that. I think that the real Thomas Jefferson might have actually been born and raised in Virginia. So again, this is one of the factually accurate parts of this image. And another factually accurate part is where it says here, furry and taking Japanese lessons. Now, as I said before, I'm not sure that the real Thomas Jefferson knew Japanese, but he was almost certainly a furry. This is well documented historical data that Thomas Jefferson was in fact a furry, and that's just something that is interesting to note. But he was definitely not taking Japanese lessons. That one's a little bit more outlandish to me, that he would be taking Japanese lessons. Under that, we see it says thinks he can cook but can't. This might be a reference to Thomas Jefferson thinking that he can cook, but actually it turns out that he doesn't actually have any cooking skill. And so that's sort of an interesting thing to note. I don't know what exactly Thomas Jefferson would be cooking that he's not good at cooking. Maybe he does not know how to use a knife in the kitchen, and that's totally okay. A lot of beginner chefs don't know how to use a knife. And there's knife incidents that can happen. And so that's something where, if it's sort of factually accurate and Thomas Jefferson was, an art education major, he would not know how to cook because he's not a cooking major. You know what I mean? He doesn't have any experience in that particular skill set. So now we have, after that, dated Angelica Schuyler before his transition. Her dad had no idea, calls her Angie, one of few who can and live. So this is a reference to Angelica Schuyler, who is actually a real person, and was actually Alexander Hamilton's sister-in-law. She was the sister of Hamilton's wife, Elizabeth Schuyler. And so Alexander, by the way, Alexander Hamilton does sort of come up in the next point or so, and we'll sort of see. So Alex dated Alexander Schuyler. Dated Angelica Schuyler before his transition, and her dad had no idea. So Angelica Schuyler would have dated Thomas before he knew that he was trans. This sort of points to the idea that Angelica might be lesbian or a bisexual woman. But who is to say that their relationship broke up after Thomas found out that he was trans? We have no idea. There's not a lot of historical data or a lot of context in this image or in the musical that sort of justifies this particular point. And again, that's something that I would have to research. But that's sort of an interesting question that this image poses. And so it says that he calls her Angie, and that he is one of few who can and live. So that's sort of implying that Angelica doesn't like it when people call her Angie, but that Thomas is sort of special, and that there's a sort of special relationship between Thomas and Angelica. So even after they broke up. So that's something that I think is sort of interesting to look at and to note in this image. Then we have it says that Thomas is obsessed with anime. Anime is a shorthand for Japanese animation. Hold on, I'm gonna get a cough drop. All of this explaining Thomas Jefferson, it really does number on my throat. But I soldier forth in the name of science. This is very important information. Again, this is a lecture, and this is all going to be on the test, so I really hope that you guys are paying attention. If you hear sucking sounds, that's the cough drop. So anime is just a shorthand. It means Japanese animation. And this is sort of a reference to the fact that Thomas Jefferson in real life did like anime. That's a real historical information. But it doesn't really follow that because he liked anime that he is taking Japanese lessons, or that he knows Japanese. That's sort of a historical liberty there. But he did like anime. His favorite animes were Attack on Titan and Naruto. This is actually historical information. Historians have studied this for a long time, and that's sort of the conclusion that they came to, is that he was a very big fan of anime. Thomas Jefferson, he enjoyed anime quite a lot. Is that something interesting? And so next we have frequents Barnes and Noble and S Bucks. So naturally, it runs into Alexander and his ex Angelica a lot. Now S Bucks, there's been some debate as to what exactly this means. But our best guess is that it means Starbucks, which is a coffee chain, a restaurant that sells coffee. So when we see it says frequents Barnes and Noble and S Bucks, we can sort of get the implication that he is a bit of a fucking dweeb. Which is this, I think, interesting and sort of an interpolation of historical facts there. And the fact that he runs into Alexander and his ex a lot at Barnes, essentially at Barnes and Noble and Starbucks. So they're dweebs as well, which is, I think, historically accurate. I would have to look that up again. And again, I'm just a researcher. I don't know, but it does seem to me to be particularly that might be historically accurate. And so next we have, it says John's former drug dealer. John is John Lawrence, who does actually make an appearance later in this series of images. We might not actually get enough time to make those, or if we do, we'll sort of breeze through it. This is taking quite a bit longer than I expected, because Thomas Jefferson, there's so much to talk about with the Thomas Jefferson Miku binder. So he's John's former drug dealer, and so this sort of tells us that he used to deal drugs, like cocaine. And that's interesting. And actually, it says in the next point, right, that he used to be addicted to cocaine, that he hates to recall his past. So we can assume that maybe he was himself addicted to cocaine and that he gave John cocaine. Presumably because he had access to the cocaine. And so that might be why. So he sort of got high on his own supply, which, as anyone who has ever sold drugs would tell you, that's a major no-go to do that. So that's sort of on him for being a loser, and that he shouldn't have done that. If you're going to deal drugs, you need to sell drugs to sort of make the profit off of them. If you're using it, that's not really a good thing to do. And so next it says tattoo artist, so that he's a tattoo artist, and that he gave Peggy her first tattoo. That's interesting. He's very skilled with a needle. That that's something that, again, it could be historically accurate, and I'm not really sure. So this artist really might have been a sort of a trailblazer in Thomas Jefferson studies, actually, and sort of asking, daring to sort of ask these questions like, what if Thomas Jefferson was trans and addicted to cocaine and a tattoo artist? So that's really interesting. And so then after that it says pretends to like jazz and classical, but is really K and J-pop trash. J-pop and K-pop are shorthands for Japanese and Korean pop music. So we can see they're talking about music genres here, jazz music and classical music versus Korean and Japanese pop music. And jazz and classical are sort of like the intellectual music genres. Use sort of like a shorthand, oh, if people are intelligent, they listen to jazz, or if people are intelligent, they listen to classical music, right? But so I think this is sort of really trying to say that Thomas Jefferson, he really wants to be perceived as being intellectual, but he really just listens to popular music, specifically popular music in Korea and in Japan. And that sort of ties into him liking anime. But it's sort of just like, listen to whatever music you want, Thomas, and like really nobody is going to judge you for liking those genres. Especially, you have a diverse friend group, which we'll see sort of later. I think I'm going to breeze through those. He has a nice diverse friend group. They'll understand if he's not like the smartest hen in the eggs basket, but he is, he's trying very hard to be perceived as intelligent. In many ways that's admirable, but you don't have to really do all that. And, so there's sort of that conflict there that I think the artist is trying to tap into. And so then it says that he is flamboyant, loudmouthed, and bad at love. Being flamboyant, it might be a reference to the fact that he's bisexual. Many gay people are often perceived stereotypically to be flamboyant. Loudmouth just sort of comes with that, just being very very out there. But then we sort of get a sort of turn on here. It's sort of like it sort of flips at the end. It says he's bad at love, so maybe he's out there, he's very boisterous, he sort of makes himself known, but then at the same time he's not really that good at love. And I think that's something that many people, especially young people, could probably relate to, sort of being out there and sort of being very showy and sort of very into these social relationships that you have with your friends, but then when it comes to love, it's a bit harder. And that's something I think it's an interesting dynamic. And I think that's something the real Thomas Jefferson might have agreed with, and might actually have sort of sympathized with that perspective. And so that's an interesting thing that the artist did. And so then we have, it says, Alexander did not want him to have a bracelet, but Maria makes them, and she seems to like them. And I didn't even point this out, right? That is a bracelet on his arm, and I think that actually it says something. No, it says left wrist something on that, so that Zelda isn't a watermark, it's actually the pattern on the bracelet. That's something I've never noticed before. It's a Zelda bracelet. And I think it's really interesting. No one ever really thinks of it. Thinks of him as Zelda bracelet Thomas Jefferson. It's always Miku binder Thomas Jefferson. I just think that's an interesting thing. We sort of zoom in on that aspect of him and not anything else. It says something about us as a society. So Maria, I actually don't know who Maria is, but I guess she makes bracelets that Alexander likes, which is good. But so he's just sort of does what he wants, no matter what his friends. If he's not going to let his friends boss him around and tell him that he can't wear a bracelet, I think that's really admirable of Thomas Jefferson. And so next we have Next and last, it says we have always beats Alex at Pokemon because his are genned by James. Alex knows, but pride always drives him to rematch him. And so Pokemon is a video game. And that sort of ties into the Zelda bracelet. You know, Pokemon and Zelda are both Nintendo things, so maybe Thomas Jefferson's a bit of a Nintendo fanboy. Now when it says like because the Pokemon are genned by James being James Madison, the genned, it just means like like James Madison trains the Pokemon and makes them super powerful, so that they will always be able to beat the Alex Hamilton's Pokemon, and of course Alex, his pride always overtakes him, and he wants to fight Thomas Jefferson again. So that's sort of a character thing. That sort of Thomas Jefferson always wants the advantage, you know, in the upper hand. But he doesn't. You always use the fair, the routes to do that. And even if Alex knows that, he's still going to try no matter what. I think that's admirable. And yeah. So that is the Thomas Jefferson Miku binder image. So that's the first image in this set. I'm going to real quickly breeze through the other three because there are three other ones. But of course, we have to start with Alexander Hamilton, you know, the Hamilton of Hamilton. So we see, first of all, his design is a little bit simpler, I think, than Thomas Jefferson Miku binder. Sleep, who's she, is what he's saying. His shirt, it says King Track and Field. I assume he does track and field for King's College, which is where he goes. Or, well, in the musical, he said he wanted a scholarship. So it's sort of like a similar thing. So we see it says Alexander Hamilton up at the top. Then gender fluid, and then his pronouns, he and she and they. So he uses all of them, all of those sets of pronouns. So that's very interesting. And good for him, you know, good for them, honestly. I think that's very admirable. So, and then it says that he's a law major, which is very nice. His languages are English, Latin, Spanish, and French. If you'll excuse me, I think someone is knocking on the door for me. Excuse me, I ordered food, and it's now here. So we're really quickly just sort of, we're actually not even going to go through the rest of these. We're just going to sort of wrap this up. And sort of understand the implications of this set of images. And in particular, the Thomas Jefferson Miku binder. You know, I think that at the end of the day, he's an inspiration to all of us. And he's certainly an inspiration to me. And I'm sure he's an inspiration to all of you who are listening. And I hope that this sort of in-depth look at Miku binder definitely, I hope it helped. Thank you for tuning in. Tune in next week when I will have an April Fool's joke that takes longer than 45 minutes. So see you later.